September 3rd, 1931. Union Station, Chicago. Al Capone was pacing his private office, the scar on his cheek twitching with rage. 8 pairs of custom Italian leather shoes sat empty on his mahogany desk. Inside each shoe, a single bullet. No note, no explanation. Just 8 bullets where 8 men should have been. "Where are my boys?" Capone's voice was ice-cold, dangerous. His lieutenant, Jake Machine Gun McGurn, couldn't meet his eyes. "Boss, we don't know. They never came back from New York." The shoes had arrived that morning via express delivery, wrapped in yesterday's Chicago Tribune. The headline read, "Yep, Pony expands east." Someone was sending a message. Someone who knew exactly how to make the most powerful man in America feel powerless. That someone was Bumpy Johnson. And what happened in those 72 hours between September 1st and 3rd, 1931, didn't just end Al Capone's expansion into Harlem. It established a principle that would govern organized crime for the next 40 years. Chicago muscle meant nothing in Harlem brain. To understand how 8 professional killers disappeared without a trace, leaving only their footwear as evidence, you need to understand why Al Capone thought he could take Harlem in the first place. By 1931, Capone controlled Chicago completely. Bootlegging, gambling, prostitution, labor unions, judges, cops, even the mayor's office. He made $100 million a year when working men earned $20 a week. He was untouchable, unstoppable, and absolutely convinced that power was about violence and volume. But Al Capone had never encountered anyone like Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy was 24 years old in 1931, already running numbers for Madame Stephanie St. Clair in Harlem. He wasn't the biggest operator, wasn't the richest, wasn't even the most feared. But he had something Capone couldn't understand. He was connected to every person, every story, every secret in a 50-block radius. When you controlled Chicago, you controlled buildings and businesses. When you controlled Harlem, you controlled hearts and minds. August 30th, 1931, 3 days before the shoes arrived. Capone was in his suite at the Lexington Hotel studying maps of Manhattan with his top strategist, Frank Nitti. The plan was simple. Send 8 of his deadliest enforcers to New York. Take over the numbers racket in Harlem. Use the same methods that worked in Chicago: intimidation, violence, and overwhelming force. Harlem's got money flowing like the Mississippi, Capone told Nitti. And it's being run by amateurs. A couple colored women and some street boys who think they're tough. Nitti nodded. "The boys are ready, boss. Tommy Torino, Sal Martino, Vincent the Voice, Mickey Wheels, Bobby Big Hands, Johnny Silk, Pat the Cat, and Crusher Carlino. Best shooters we got." Capone looked at the 8 photographs spread across his desk. Each man had at least a dozen confirmed kills. Each man was absolutely loyal, absolutely ruthless, absolutely professional. "Give them whatever they need," Capone said. "Guns, money, connections. I want them to walk into Harlem like they own it. Because in 3 days, they will." What Capone didn't know was that his plan had already failed before his men even left Chicago. Bumpy Johnson had sources everywhere, including Union Station. A red-cap porter named Calvin Sweet Cal Williams had been on Bumpy's payroll for 2 years, sending word about anything unusual heading east from Chicago. 8 well-dressed white men buying first-class tickets to New York, traveling with heavy suitcases, talking quietly in Italian. That was unusual enough to warrant a phone call. September 1st, 8:15 a.m. Bumpy received the call while having breakfast at Minnie's Kitchen on 45th Street. 8 Chicago boys on the morning train. Sweet Cal reported. "Expensive suits. Expensive shoes, carrying heavy. They'll be at Penn Station by 7 tonight." Bumpy set down his coffee cup and smiled. Not a happy smile. The chess player's smile. "Thanks, Cal. Your envelope will be double this month." Most men would have panicked. Called for backup. Prepared for war. But Bumpy Johnson wasn't most men. He finished his breakfast, left exact change plus a 20% tip, and walked calmly to his next stop, the office of Detective William Iron Bill McCarthy. Iron Bill was one of 3 honest cops in the entire NYPD, which made him incredibly valuable to someone like Bumpy, who understood that reputation was everything. Bill didn't take bribes, didn't take favors, but he did respect honesty, and he absolutely hated outside interference in his city. "Bill," Bumpy said, settling into the chair across from the detective's desk, "I need to report a crime that's about to happen." Bill looked up from his paperwork. "What kind of crime?" 8 men from Chicago are coming to New York tonight to commit murder. Multiple murders. They're armed, they're professional, and they're here to start a war. Bill's eyes narrowed. How do you know this? Because they're coming for me and my people. Al Capone wants to take over Harlem, and he's sent his best killers to make it happen. Now here's where the genius of Bumpy Johnson revealed itself. He didn't ask Iron Bill to arrest the men. He didn't ask for protection. He asked for something much more valuable, documentation. I want this on the record, Bumpy said. 8 men from Chicago arriving tonight, planning to commit crimes in your jurisdiction. I'm an American citizen reporting a clear and present danger. What you do with that information is up to you. Bill stared at Bumpy for a long moment. You're putting this on me. I'm putting this on the law. I believe in the law, Bill. I believe if 8 armed criminals come to New York planning to commit murder, the NYPD should know about it. 20 minutes later, Bill McCarthy had filed an official report. Credible intelligence regarding armed Chicago operatives planning criminal activity in Manhattan. The report was time-stamped, witnessed, and placed in official NYPD files. Bumpy left the police station and made his second stop. The office of Abraham, Honest Abe Rosen, the one journalist in New York who couldn't be bought by money but could be convinced by truth. Me, Bumpy said. I've got a story for you. Al Capone is invading New York tonight. Everyone was skeptical until Bumpy laid out every detail. The 8 men, their names, their backgrounds, their arrival time, even their hotel reservations at the plaza. Information that only someone with serious connections could obtain. This is front-page material, Abe said, already reaching for his typewriter. Not yet, Bumpy replied. I want you to write the story, but don't publish it until I give you the word. Think of it as insurance. By sunset on September 1st, Bumpy had all his pieces in position. The police knew. The press knew. And most importantly, every person in Harlem knew that 8 killers from Chicago were coming to their neighborhood. But instead of preparing for war, Bumpy was preparing for theater. 7:23 p.m., Penn Station. 8 men stepped off the train from Chicago, looking exactly like what they were. Professional killers trying to blend in. Expensive suits that fit too perfectly. Shoes that cost more than most people made in a month. Suitcases that hung heavy on one side. Tommy Torino, the crew chief, led them through the station. He was 34 years old, had killed 16 men, and was absolutely confident that New York would be just another job. They took taxis to the Plaza Hotel, checked in under false names, and began planning their assault on Harlem. What they didn't notice was that every person who saw them, taxi drivers, hotel clerks, bellhops, elevator operators, was taking mental notes. In Harlem, information was currency, and Bumpy Johnson paid better than anyone. September 2nd, 6 a.m., Bumpy received his first intelligence report while shaving in his apartment on 36th Street. 8 men at the plaza, room numbers 412, 412, 116, and 4118. They've got enough weapons to outfit a small army. They're planning to hit Madame St. Clair's operation first. Establish control, then work their way through the smaller operators. Bumpy rinsed his razor and smiled at his reflection. Time to welcome our guests to Harlem. What happened next wasn't violence. It was something far more devastating, complete social isolation. At 8 a.m., Tommy Torino and his crew left the Plaza Hotel for breakfast. They found that every restaurant they entered suddenly became fully booked. Every taxi they hailed suddenly developed mechanical problems. Every hotel employee they tried to speak with suddenly spoke only broken English. By noon, they realized something was wrong. By evening, they understood they were trapped in a city of 7 million people where no one would acknowledge their existence. It's like we're ghosts, Vincent the Voice told Tommy as they stood on a street corner in Midtown, unable to get a cab, unable to get directions, unable to get anything except polite smiles and sudden incomprehension. Tommy was getting nervous, but he wasn't giving up. Tomorrow we go to Harlem and finish this job, with or without help from these New York idiots. September 3rd, 5 a.m. 8 men left the Plaza Hotel for the last time. They carried their weapons openly now, no longer caring about subtlety. They were professionals. They had a job to do, and they were going to complete it. They never made it to Harlem. What happened to them between 5 a.m. and noon on September 3rd remains one of the greatest mysteries in organized crime history. No shots were fired. No violence was reported. 8 men simply vanished from the face of the earth, leaving only their shoes behind. Here's what we know from witness accounts and police reports. 5:15 a.m. 8 men were seen entering Central Park near 59th Street. 6:30 a.m. A hot dog vendor reported seeing 8 men arguing with a well-dressed colored gentleman near the Bethesda fountain. 7:45 a.m. A park maintenance worker found 8 pairs of expensive shoes lined up neatly on a park bench, each containing a single bullet. 8:00 a.m. The same shoes were delivered to Union Station in Chicago via express messenger service. That's it. No bodies, no witnesses to violence. No evidence of foul play. Just 8 pairs of shoes and a message that Al Capone would never forget. But what really happened to those 8 men in Central Park? The truth reveals the full scope of Bumpy's psychological masterpiece. The well-dressed colored gentleman seen arguing with the 8 men wasn't Bumpy himself. It was his longtime associate, Illinois Gordon, a man who spoke 7 languages and had a PhD in psychology from Columbia University. Gordon didn't threaten the men, he educated them. "Gentlemen," Gordon had said, approaching the 8 killers as they sat on park benches, planning their assault on Harlem, "you're about to make the biggest mistake of your lives. Not because you might die, but because you might live." Tommy Torino, suspicious but curious, had asked what that meant. "It means," Gordon continued, "that in Chicago, you're somebody. You're feared, respected, powerful. But the moment you step foot in Harlem with violent intentions, you become nobody. Not dead nobodies. Living nobodies. Men who exist but don't matter." He pulled out a newspaper, that morning's edition of the Amsterdam News, Harlem's premier publication. The headline read, "Chicago Wolves Hunt in Wrong Woods." Below it was a photograph of all 8 men taken as they left their hotel that morning. 500,000 people in Harlem know your faces, Gordon explained. They know your names, your backgrounds, your missions. You're not hunters anymore, gentlemen. You're prey. Vincent, the voice had laughed nervously. "You threatening us?" "No," Gordon replied calmly. "I'm offering you a choice. Walk away now, leave your shoes as a symbol that you understand the lesson, and disappear quietly, or proceed with your plan and discover what it's like to be hunted by an entire community." What happened next reveals the true genius of Bumpy's strategy. Gordon didn't wait for their answer. He simply walked away, leaving the 8 men to contemplate their situation. For 2 hours they sat in that park, watching the people around them. Joggers who slowed down as they passed. Dog walkers who photographed them from a distance. Children who pointed and whispered. Even in Central Park, miles from Harlem, they were being watched, cataloged, studied. Mickey Wheels was the first to break. "This is wrong," he told Tommy. "This whole job is wrong. We're not killers here. We're specimens." The psychological pressure was unlike anything they'd experienced. These were men who controlled through fear, who derived their identity from being the most dangerous people in any room. But in New York, they were curiosities, objects of study, specimens in someone else's laboratory. By noon, all 8 men had made the same decision independently. They would abandon the mission, but they couldn't just leave. Bumpy Johnson had demonstrated his power so thoroughly that simply walking away would be an admission of defeat that would follow them forever. So they performed the ritual Gordon had suggested. One by one, they removed their expensive Italian leather shoes, placed them on the park bench, and walked away in their socks. It was their way of acknowledging that they had no right to walk on Bumpy's ground. The shoes weren't stolen or confiscated. They were surrendered. A voluntary admission that Chicago power had no place in Harlem. Years later, in 1947, Tommy Torino surfaced in Buenos Aires working as a security guard for a small import business. A reporter tracked him down and asked what happened in New York. "We met the devil," Tommy said quietly. "And he didn't need to hurt us to destroy us. He just made us disappear, made us realize we didn't belong in his world." The reporter pressed for details. Tommy shook his head. "You don't understand. Bumpy Johnson didn't threaten us. He didn't fight us. He just showed us the truth. Chicago muscle doesn't work in Harlem. We were 8 strangers in a neighborhood where everyone knew. Everyone. We were predators in a place where the community itself was the weapon." When pressed about the shoes, Tommy's face went pale. That was his signature, his calling card. He took our shoes because he took our ability to walk in his world. We could keep our lives, but we could never stand on Harlem ground again. The brilliance of Bumpy's strategy wasn't just tactical. It was psychological. He didn't kill Capone's men because dead men can't deliver messages. He made them disappear because vanishing is more terrifying than death. Death is final, comprehensible. Disappearing means you never existed in the first place. Al Capone received those shoes on September 3rd and immediately understood the message. This wasn't a territorial dispute. This wasn't even a battle. This was a masterclass in power, taught by someone who operated on a level Capone couldn't reach. Boss, Machine Gun McGurn said carefully, "What do we do about New York?" Capone stared at the 8 pairs of shoes for a long time. Then he swept them off his desk with one angry motion. "We stay in Chicago. New York has its own rules." It was the first time in Al Capone's criminal career that he backed down without a fight. But it wasn't cowardice. It was recognition. He'd tried to apply Chicago solutions to a Harlem problem, and he'd learned that some territories can't be conquered with violence. Bumpy Johnson had done something unprecedented. He defeated Al Capone without firing a shot, without spilling blood, without even meeting him face to face. He'd used intelligence, community connections, and psychological warfare to make 8 professional killers simply cease to exist. The ripple effects extended far beyond that September morning. Frank Nitti, who had orchestrated the original plan, found his reputation damaged within Capone's organization. "You told me this would be easy," Capone reminded him during a tense meeting in October 1931. "You said Harlem was run by amateurs." Nitti had no response. "How do you explain that you'd been outmaneuvered by someone you'd never heard of?" Within 3 months, other crime families began testing their own theories about Harlem. The Detroit Purple Gang sent 2 representatives in December 1931. They returned with a polite letter explaining that their investment opportunities weren't needed in Harlem, along with first-class train tickets back to Michigan paid for by concerned community members. The Kansas City Pendergast machine tried a different approach in early 1932, sending political operatives instead of muscle. They discovered that every hotel room in Manhattan had suddenly become unavailable to unregistered political visitors, and that every restaurant they entered had inexplicably run out of food. Each failed attempt reinforced the same lesson. Bumpy Johnson had created something unprecedented in organized crime, a territory that defended itself through collective intelligence rather than individual violence. The 8 shoes became legendary in their own right. Young criminals in Chicago would point to them and dare each other to go get them back. None ever tried. By 1933, the shoes had become a teaching tool. When ambitious lieutenants proposed expansion into other territories, Capone would gesture to that shelf and tell the same story. That's what happens when you try to be the smartest guy in a room full of people who know more than you do. The psychological impact on Capone's organization was profound. For the first time, his men had seen their boss acknowledge defeat without violence, retreat without bloodshed. Some viewed it as wisdom. Others whispered about weakness. The unity that had made Capone's empire strong began to show hairline cracks. Meanwhile, in Harlem, Bumpy Johnson's reputation transformed overnight. He wasn't just another operator anymore. He was the man who had made Al Capone's killers disappear without firing a shot. Numbers runners who had never heard his name suddenly wanted to work for him. Policy banks that had operated independently began seeking his protection. But Bumpy understood something crucial. Reputation was only as strong as your ability to live up to it. The 8 shoes weren't just Capone's problem. They were Bumpy's promise. A promise that Harlem would always be defended by intelligence rather than brutality, by community rather than fear. Detective Bill McCarthy kept the official report in his files until he retired in 1956. Before leaving the force, he told his replacement, "If anyone ever asks you about September 1931, you tell them the truth. Sometimes the law and justice walk hand in hand, even when they take different paths to get there." Abraham Honest Abe Rosen never published his story about the 8 Chicago killers. The article sat in his desk drawer until his death in 1963, a reminder that some truths are more powerful when they remain mysteries. The story spread through organized crime circles like wildfire. Within 6 months, every major crime family in America knew the lesson. Harlem belonged to Bumpy Johnson, and anyone who challenged that would face something worse than death. They'd face irrelevance. Al Capone never spoke publicly about the failed New York expedition. But privately, he told his closest associates something that became legend in Chicago. There are wolves, and there are lions, and then there's whatever lives in Harlem. We're not going back. The 8 pairs of shoes ended up in Capone's private office. displayed on a shelf like trophies. But they weren't his trophies. They were Bumpy Johnson's trophies, placed there as a daily reminder of the day Chicago's king learned he was just another man in someone else's kingdom.
Bumpy Johnson proved something that changed organized crime forever. True power isn't about who has the biggest guns or the most men. True power is about who controls the environment, who understands the people, who can make reality itself bend to their will.
Old Capone sent 8 killers to eliminate one man. Instead, one man eliminated 8 killers' ability to exist in his world, and he did it all by understanding something Capone never learned. In the right hands, community is the deadliest weapon of all.